Let not your heart be troubled. Listen to me, Sean Hannity. I'll have the latest news and what it all means for you. It's coming up at 2 right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning is Kristen McQuarrie from the Chicago Tribune editorial board. And the stories leading the news today are not just the Sessions' response to the Trump criticism before the New York Times for his recusal from the Russian collusion investigation. Jeff Sessions yesterday at a press conference on an unrelated topic answering the question as to his confidence, as to the president's confidence in him.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General. It's something that goes beyond any thought I would have ever had for myself. We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
And the question, Kristen, is how long is Sessions for the AG job? Is Trump's criticism setting up either a forced resignation or a replacement of Sessions, maybe top deputies too, like Rod Rosenstein? And is that a setup to fire Bob Mueller, particularly as he, according to Bloomberg, begins to move the investigation into a review of Trump's business dealings?
Let's pose the question to Mike Emanuel.
We do that. Mike Emanuel is the chief congressional correspondent and senior political correspondent for Fox News, and he joins us now. Mike, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Good morning to you guys.
Good morning. And so, how jumpy are Republicans on the Hill about the prospect of not only replacing Sessions, but really of firing Mueller?
Well, there's a lot of frustration with Republicans on the Hill because they just think a lot of this stuff is a huge distraction. When they turn the corner, they get questions from people like me about Russia and Mueller and Sessions and whether he's about to be fired, and they would rather be talking about tax reform. They're struggling mightily right now with health care, but they'd rather talk tax reform and some other issues on the legislative agenda, and instead they're getting questions about, the latest drama coming from the White House and the drip, drip, drip of Russia stories that seem to, go day after day.
The prospect, though, of Trump firing Mueller, two questions with respect to that. One, how real is Trump's inclination to do that? Because there's a lot in conservative journalistic circles who think it's very real. And number two, what the political fallout would be within the Republican Party on the Hill if that were to come to pass.
Great question. I think, a lot of folks on the Hill, a lot of Republicans were relieved when Bob Mueller was picked because his credentials are impeccable, and at least up to this point. And so they felt like perhaps they would get a break from being constantly asked about Russia and just say, well, it's in the hands of this independent guy who, we have great faith and confidence in. I think everybody took what the president said to the New York Times the other day to suggest that Jeff Sessions' days as Attorney General are numbered. I came to Washington with George W. Bush, and so I've covered a couple of 8-year terms of presidents. And if a president were to say that, I would think that a resignation letter would be on his desk the next day. Sessions was forced to come out yesterday and say, I'm planning to stick around, but certainly not a great vote of confidence. In terms of firing Mueller, I think a lot of Republicans on the Hill would say that's a huge mistake because, they feel like he's got solid credentials, and if you have nothing to hide, nothing to fear, then why would you get rid of him? And so it's a lot of drama these days.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, in terms of the inability to pass Obamacare, I don't see the Republicans in any way being able to pin this on the Democrats. I think it will have a huge trickle-down effect on Republican races, even in the House where they passed some sort of repeal and replace. What is your take on how disastrous this could be if they do, in fact, move on to tax reform and just let that linger?
I think you're onto something there. I mean, I think, I've been to a million rallies over the years since 2010 where Republicans have said, if given the chance, we will repeal and replace Obamacare. And I don't see how you can go back on that promise. And I think a lot of the takeaway from the 2016 election was, that they were not electing Republicans. they were electing a guy to basically shake things up here in Washington. And so if you're not getting done what you promised to the American people, I think there's going to be a huge price tag. And a lot of people on Capitol Hill want to say, oh, Dean Heller from Nevada, he's got a tough reelection in a state that Hillary Clinton won. I think the bigger consequences may be if you don't keep your promise to the American people. This may not be the right package, but I don't think they can walk away because I do think they will be blamed. They have the White House, they have the Senate, and they have the House. I think you own it at that point because you have all the power in government. So I'm sure they can be upset that the Democrats have run the clock in the Senate and they've, not come to the table to try to work out a better solution in terms of health care. But I think they knew that going in, that the Democrats were never going to repeal Obamacare. If you want to fix Obamacare, then I think they'll come to the table. And so it's complicated. And I heard just yesterday some leadership types saying they were still throwing ideas on the table, trying to see if anything would get them to 50 votes in the Senate. And so far they seem a little skeptical. Perhaps after next week, if they hold people to account by trying to bring something to the floor, perhaps at that point they'll all get serious and try to get something done after that.
Back to Russia next week. Paul Manafort and Don Jr. supposedly prepared to testify behind closed doors to the Senate Judiciary Committee. But yet Manafort, according to a couple of different outlets, is apparently the subject of a money laundering investigation by Mueller. So he's still willing to testify to Senate Judiciary given that cloud hanging over him. How does that play out next week based on what we know at this point?
That's a great question. It'll be interesting to see what his lawyers let him answer, and whether, I've covered a number of hearings over the years on Capitol Hill where the witness comes up and says, I plead the fifth because based on the advice of my counsel. And so, if you hear him say that a bunch of times, then he's in some pretty serious potential jeopardy. So I have not gotten a good readout from the judiciary types about what they expect from Manafort so far. They may not know at this point because they may not be sure what his lawyers will let him say.
What are we to read into the appointment of Anthony Scaramucci as the new communications director, and how his comm shop, Trump's comm shop, is going to function, and who plays what role?
That's a great question. I wonder what the analysis is internally in terms of how these keeping the briefings off camera has served them. I know in the press corps, it's been very frustrating to, not have that give and take on camera. And maybe that's just a personal problem of the media, but, are they well served by that? Does it look like something's up because, previous White Houses have done on-camera briefings on a fairly regular basis? Scaramucci is somebody that obviously President Trump trusts a great deal. His name's been out there for a bunch of big jobs over the recent months. And so clearly it's bringing in a close confidant and a guy who's done some TV himself, appearing on our network quite often, and somebody that he believes in that can get out there and sell the message. And so it'd be interesting to see what the ripple effect may be from there.
All right. He is Mike Emanuel, chief congressional correspondent and senior political correspondent for Fox News. Mike, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.